Learning Courage is a nonprofit membership organization that works with K-12 independent schools to reduce incidents, improve responses, and support healing from sexual misconduct and abuse by guiding and advising on best practices, tools, and resources. They've now been around for 4 years, and today I'm joined by Jamie Forbes, the CEO of the organization, to discuss their work, how much of a problem sexual misconduct is, and why this subject hits so close to him. Welcome to the show, Jamie.
Thanks for having me.
So to start off with, I'll first encourage everyone to check out his TEDx talk that he recently gave in Woodstock, Vermont. I'll put in the episode description if you're checking this out on the podcast or YouTube, and I'll also put in the article at thenewenglandtake.com. I have to firstly tip my hat off to you for the bravery of telling your story and speaking out in court against your abuser. I have to say that having people tell their story like that must be one of the most powerful tools to prevent abuse and embolden those that are being abused to get help.
Yeah, it was an interesting confluence of, initially I was asked to be a TEDx speaker, and as I got closer to the actual date, realized that, in fact, the court date where I would face the man who abused me was actually a week after the TEDx talk. And so initially I didn't actually plan on talking about what was going to happen in court the week after the TEDx talk, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized it could be a really powerful way to combine the two that really just happened to overlap really by coincidence.
Yeah, and I like to always talk about the law and everything and the importance of the legal system. I mean, it's so important to have people go to court, give their stories, to make sure people that will no longer be able to hurt other people.
It's so true, and yet unfortunately the legal system, it can be really challenging. I mean, it's challenging for anyone, and so often, unfortunately, for those who have been victimized or are survivors of sexual abuse, it is such a grueling process to come forward that oftentimes people just decide not to do it. And then they unfortunately hold that for the rest of their lives. And it can cause incredible impact from PTSD to difficulty with relationships, to substance abuse, mental disorders, and all kinds of things. So it's really a significant issue that unfortunately is not talked about all that much because it's an uncomfortable topic.
Now, like I said, you just said your TEDx talk actually took place right before that hearing. What was that like, actually being in court and giving your testimony?
You know, it was really challenging. I didn't have to be in court. I was given the option to be there, and my court case took 5 years from start to finish. And there were several times that I thought the case was actually dead in the water. It was actually dismissed by a judge at one point. And when I began the case, the man who abused me was living in Southeast Asia. So it seemed like a long shot, really, to even pursue the case. But the assistant DA of Norfolk County in Massachusetts suggested they thought they had a good case. And within 6 months, he was indicted. But that was just really the beginning, because then they started working with the U.S. government and then collaborating with agencies over in Southeast Asia. And I mean, it was an incredible experience to then hear about 2 years later that he was actually extradited to the U.S. And that meant the whole case could move forward. So to be able to then, 5 years after the whole process began, to be in a courtroom with him and then be able to deliver an impact statement to the judge, which explained really all of the impacts that the abuse had on me throughout my life, was really challenging, and I felt it was important both for me and for others to hear.
Are you able to give any status on where that case is at this point?
Yeah, so actually, the case has concluded. He pled guilty. He's living under house arrest of consequences. He has to wear a GPS tracker. Certainly can't work with kids. Had to attend sex offender treatment, and a few other things. So he never did jail time, but at least I mean, from my standpoint, to have his admission was really important, and it also meant that there was press around it, so that he couldn't hide in the shadows and pretend that this was something that didn't happen and that he didn't do.
So let's dive into Learning Courage. How did this come about, and what's the day-to-day work of it?
So Learning Courage is a nonprofit organization, and AJ, as you said at the beginning, and our work is with independent schools, and independent schools, often called private schools, and that's our focus today. And the reason is that I actually attended a private school, Milton Academy, just south of Boston, and that's where the abuse took place. Really sort of the origin story for Learning Courage is that in 2016, after the Boston Globe did an expose on educator sexual misconduct in schools, in private schools in particular, many schools, Milton Academy included, sent out a letter to their alumni asking if anyone had been sexually abused during their time at the school. And one of my best friends who knew of my abuse and also went to school with me received the letter and called me and said, do you think it's time to tell your story? And that led me down the path of being a survivor, going back to the place that had broken my trust as a youth. And I got to experience what it felt like to go back to a place not knowing if they would believe me or how they would react. And I saw also how really well-intentioned people lacked the skills and resources to support me as a survivor. And I could only assume that was also happening with any other conversations that they were having with others. And so it was really in that experience that I felt inspired to help schools. And so I started working first with Milton Academy after what turned out to be a 9-month-long investigation. They asked me to help them in the response to all of the different findings from that investigation. And then I started working with other schools. I reached out to other schools, as I said, many other schools, as a result of that Boston Globe article, sent out similar letters, and they were going through investigations of their own, and they were reeling from the results, and their communities were reeling from the results. And I figured that because of my lived experience as a survivor, I could help those schools understand how to be survivor-centered and how to help them keep survivors at the center of the conversation, because that was actually quite different than what I was observing many schools had done in the past, which was really sort of circle the wagons, bring the attorneys in, deny anything happened. And I just knew intuitively and also from a personal standpoint that there was a better way. And so I started in 2019. I started Learning Courage, and we've been at it ever since.
It's understandable when you're trying to make sure, on one side, I understand the schools thinking, okay, we're going to completely ruin our school by having these stories come out. And fortunately, it seems like the narrative with the public now is shifted where, yes, bad things have happened. We're not going to necessarily tear down your entire institution because these things have happened. Where hopefully we'll rout out the problems, we'll reform the institution and make it better, because we need private schools in this country. I think there's definitely a valuable place for it. I mean, the Catholic Church has certainly been through a lot. Another Boston Globe story that really upturned everyone's world, and like, these institutions are important. We need to fix it, and instead of just saying, "Hey, their brand is broken. We're not gonna respect them anymore."
That's right, and I think that people are increasingly understanding, as you suggest, that this is really about safety, and it's about making sure that their schools are safe and that kids can be in a position to actually learn and take in all of the learning, but only if they feel safe. And so the work of Learning Courage is not just in helping schools in the context of historic abuse. We a lot of our work, in fact, what we feel is most important is preventing incidents from happening, because obviously that's where we can have the greatest impact. And of course, we do help them with when incidents have happened, either between students or in the cases of historic misconduct, educator sexual misconduct, whether it was, happened recently or in the distant past.
Are there any specific stories you can give with regards to institutions you've worked with?
Wow. Well, there are just a lot of stories, particularly around historic abuse. And obviously, those are very sensitive. So I guess one story I can share with you that I'm particularly proud of, and it's actually based on a group of adults with an independent school that we worked with that had a case of historic abuse, and a group of alums from that school were really dissatisfied with how the school responded, and they felt the school was not really taking full responsibility for what happened and how they responded and the harm that was caused. And so the school really felt like they were at an impasse with these people, and they wanted to help, and the individuals were so angry and understandably didn't really trust the school. And what ultimately happened, because the school was a member school of Learning Courage, they asked us to work with, see if we could build a bridge with this group of alumni, and try and come up with a plan to move forward. And actually, on the group of alumni on their own, as they started moving, felt as though one way that the school could really memorialize this and take accountability for the history was to create a garden on the campus. Now, this is a beautiful campus in northwestern Connecticut, which had a lot of acreage, and this group of alumni said, why don't we create a garden? And this would be a garden that hopefully would feel like a sanctuary for anyone who is hurting or who was hurt at the time. And the garden actually became a rallying point for the alumni, and the school really got behind it. And in fact, we were able to build enough trust with both the alumni, because my colleague and I, who were working directly with the school, are both survivors of historic abuse ourselves. So we sort of have this ability to connect with survivors because of that shared experience. And we had built a level of trust with the school. And so the school really got behind this idea of the garden, and ultimately they asked my colleague to be the MC for the event that celebrated the opening of the garden, the dedication of the garden, and they invited alums who had been abused, who had suffered abuse during their time at the school, who then we had created enough of a safe space for them based on our work together where they felt they could return to the school. And there was this incredible moment during the dedication where the head of school stood up and apologized to everyone in the audience, and specifically to those who had been abused for the school's failures, and took strong accountability for the school's failures, and made a personal commitment to do whatever he could to make sure that would never happen again. And that was an incredibly powerful experience for the survivors, because they felt like up until that point they hadn't really heard all of that. And then we actually, after that moment, we actually walked down to the garden, which at the centerpiece was this stone sculpture that had an inscription on it. And I won't get the exact quotation, but it was something to the effect of, "To those who were impacted by the sexual abuse at this school, we hope you will find comfort and solace here in this garden." And I mean, literally inscribed in the rock. So this was a really strong statement for a school to make, and a really powerful thing for survivors who had been abused at the school to see. It was a real highlight for us in our work to be able to bring that previously really angry group of alums who had been hurt back to a place where they actually felt safe and could really legitimately heal a lot of the harm that had been done. It was a really incredible experience.
Yeah, that's absolutely incredible. I can't think of a better word to describe that, turning it around that way. That's very powerful. I mean, to make sure people know, like, there's a reason why organizations like this are needed currently. You talked about historic, but what about now? In the press release that initiated this conversation, it's like there were conversations about stats and what the numbers look like now for sexual misconduct among with children. And what are those numbers, and where do those numbers come from? I always feel it's important, actually. Like, what exactly do the statistics refer to? Because often they're just glossed over in major news outlets. So we have a chance to actually talk about it for a few minutes.
Yeah, I mean, just to give you a sense of the scale, there was a 2005 study quoted that 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 males are sexually abused before they're 18. So, I mean, that's just a staggering statistic. And unfortunately, because childhood sexual abuse in particular is just such a horrific crime, and no one wants to think about it or talk about it. In fact, it's likely that those statistics are even higher, but those are just the reported statistics. So it's really it's a significant issue. That is just a horrific number, and that's one of the reasons why I just feel so compelled to talk about this issue, because it's one that most people find really uncomfortable to talk about. And my feeling is the more we can feel comfortable talking about this, the more we can actually be effective at preventing incidents from happening.
Briefly, do you feel like we're making progress in the right direction when it comes to addressing this problem? Obviously, Learning Courage is doing a lot, but overall, you hear about the lawsuits. Talk about the Catholic Church earlier. Boy Scouts of America has had considerable reforms and lawsuits and things like that. Many private schools across the country have actually stepped up and tried to make right the mistakes of the past. Are we going in the right direction?
I think we are. Sadly, we just have so much work to do in this area. And so I would say that we're making progress from the standpoint of it's more part of the public conversation. And yet there is still so much work that we have to do. You know, I'm 56 years old. When I was in high school, it was just people didn't talk about it. And I would say today, and particularly in the wake of the Me Too movement, people are more aware and willing to stand up and admit or speak in public that they were victimized and actually experience, to support that can come with that, and are less likely to be accused of perhaps bringing it on themselves. That's really where I think we have the most work to do, particularly as it relates to female identifying survivors. It's still, unfortunately, a very common thought or question in law enforcement and in the court system. What were you wearing? Don't you think that being in that situation was putting yourself at risk? Those are questions that we really display or disclose someone's mindset. That's really an old pattern and an old way of thinking that we're hopefully moving beyond.
All right, Jamie Forbes of Learning Courage, I really thank you for taking the time to tell these stories, and definitely suggest everyone checks out learningcourage.org. They're based out of Portsmouth, New Hampshire, so they're not far from where we are over here in Concord with the New England Take. So definitely gladly have you back on in the future if you ever have any other stories to really raise awareness, because it's an important topic. And once again, the TEDx talk that Jamie gave is in the description and at thenewenglandtake.com. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks, AJ. I really appreciate it.
TheNewEnglandTake.com to get more from the show. Like and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, YouTube, and check out TheNewEnglandTake.com.